Neuroscience and proof of the biblical soul. Okay, so near death experiences, an end of life experience called terminal lucidity, abstract thoughts, and a condition called hydrocephalus. These anomalies show the distinction between the brain and the mind and the existence of the soul. So we'll look at them individually alongside the Bible and what it has to say about the soul. Okay, so what is the soul? The soul is synonymous with the ruach or spirit. It's your immaterial conscious being that's made up of all of your experiences. Like David says, bless Yahuwah, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. So your soul represents everything that is within you. Job 33 verse 4 says, the Ruach of Elohim has made me, and the breath of the Almighty has given me life. And the process of Almighty giving us life is mentioned in the scriptures. 2nd Ezra chapter 3 and verse 5 says, Yahuwah gave a body unto Adam without soul, which was the workmanship of your hands, and did breathe into him the breath of life, and he was made living before you. Genesis 2:7 says, Yahuwah Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Wisdom of Solomon 15:11 says, Yahuwah inspired into him an active soul, and breathed in a living ruach. Zechariah 12:1 says, Yahuwah forms the ruach of man within him. Job 32:8 says, there is a ruach in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty gives them understanding. So the breath of life, Yahuwah's spirit or ruach, formed a soul within us that gives us life and consciousness of mind that we express through our material or physical body. And as Job says, if he set his heart upon man, if he gather unto himself his ruach and his breath, all flesh shall perish together, and man shall turn again unto dust. So that means we depend on Yahuwah for life, the breath of life that connects to our soul. And it's through that connection that Yahuwah knows all about us. Isaiah 42:5 says, El Yahuwah, he that created the heavens and stretched them out, he that spread forth the earth and that which comes out of it, he that gives breath unto the people upon it, and ruach to them that walk therein. Proverbs 20:27 says, the ruach of man is the candle of Yahuwah, searching all the inward parts of the belly. Ezekiel 11:5 says, I know the things that come into your mind, every one of them. And your mind is your soul. It's the sum of your consciousness. It's your thoughts, your feelings, desires, memories, hopes, etc. But how can we prove the soul's existence and its distinction from the physical body? The physical body is matter. It's a physical but limited representation of a spiritual reality. For example, if you look out the windscreen of a car, the boundary of the windscreen limits the world's reality in its entirety. It's like what Corinthians said, that there's a natural body and there's a spiritual body, and that the things which are seen are temporal, that's the physical, but the things which are not seen are eternal, that's the spiritual. So in other words, there's another element to reality that isn't available to us. Now, the brain is pink matter, or cells and neurons in your skull. It's physical, temporal, but distinct from the mind and the soul, which carries a spiritual continuum of existence, which is eternal. So we're part material, matter or flesh, and part immaterial, spirit. And like the neurosurgeon Michael Egnall said, it's the soul that bridges the connection between the spiritual world and the material world. So even though we're told that we think with our physical brains, you'll see in some instances that the thinking or perceiving part of us detaches from the physical body and exists elsewhere as consciousness. Several anomalies show this, but we're going to look at NDEs, terminal lucidity, abstract thoughts, and hydrocephalus. Okay, so near-death experiences. Probably the most famous case is Pam Reynolds. A blood vessel supplying blood to her brain bulged, so hypothermic cardiac arrest was needed, meaning sedation, cooling the body temperature, stopping her heart and the blood pumping to her brain, and draining the blood in her brain. Without brain death, the procedure wouldn't work, and it was conditions of hypothermia and medication that prevented brain damage throughout the procedure. So they drilled into her brain, and Pam described feeling as though she was being pulled out of her head until completely out of her physical body. She described looking down at herself, at the operating room and at its equipment, and hearing the conversations of the medical team. And that's despite her heart having stopped and no registered brainwaves, which the neurosurgeon confirmed that she was clinically dead throughout the surgery. Now, if the mind or consciousness was produced by the brain, then consciousness shouldn't have been possible when her brain was dead. But still, Pam experienced feelings, perceptions, and thinking ability, even to a more heightened extent compared to her standard physical state. And Pam's not alone. 10 to 20% of near-death experiences report similarly, meaning some NDEs are examples of the mind and soul surviving the death of the physical brain and show a distinction between the two. and how the mind carries a spiritual continuum of consciousness or existence. And the end of life experience called terminal lucidity shows the same thing. Terminal lucidity is where sometimes people with irreversible brain diseases suddenly become coherent and cognizant days or moments before death. So these are people who couldn't speak or recognize loved ones before, suddenly becoming mentally clear and able to have meaningful conversations and express emotions appropriately. It's been in medical literature for 250 plus years, but from the 20th century it was commonly ignored, presumably because science has no explanation for it. That is, no explanation for people at terminal stages of Alzheimer's disease, advanced dementia, severe neurological damage from strokes, chronic schizophrenia, meningitis, brain abscesses or tumors, suddenly becoming coherent and cognizant beyond the brain's physical capacity. Anna Katharina Emma is a good example. She was retarded from birth, never learned to speak a word, and stayed at an asylum, staring for hours at nothing, making animal noises, fouling herself without noticing her environment. She also had meningitis infections that damaged her brain tissue before she died. But before she passed away, something strange happened. She started singing dying songs to herself. The director of the asylum, Friedrich Hapich, said she sang specifically, "Where does the soul find its home? It's peace. Peace, peace, heavenly peace." So she sang that song for half an hour before she passed away. And remember, this was someone mentally disabled from birth, never speaking a word before. Friedrich said, "I cannot explain this in medical terms. If demanded, I can prove by autopsy that, from an anatomical perspective, thinking could not have been possible." Dr. Whitweber also reported, "I hurried to her room to observe what would contradict all medical experience. But it's true. Kathy sang, very intelligibly, 'Where does the soul find its home? It's peace.'" Now, there's a lot of cases on terminal lucidity, and overall, what the anomaly suggests is that when the body and the brain shuts down, the mind and the soul can take over in expression and in functionality. Abstract thought also shows a distinction between the physical brain and the mind. Abstract thought, a reasonable definition, is the ability to conceptualize ideas outside of sensory observation. Now, Wilder Penfield was a highly credentialed neurosurgeon and one of the first to operate on the brains of patients whilst they're awake. And what he found is that there are no brain receptors for abstract thought or reasoning, meaning no place in the cerebral cortex where electrical stimulation could cause a patient to reflect or decide. And he found this out by placing electrodes on the brain and stimulating movements, perceptions, sensations, emotions, and memory in patients. But he was unable to stimulate reasoning, reflection, and free will, which is abstract thought. He said, "When I've caused a conscious patient to move his hand by applying an electrode to the motor cortex of one hemisphere, I've often asked him about it. Invariably, his response was, 'I didn't do that, you did.' When I caused him to vocalize, he said, 'I didn't make that sound, you pulled it out of me.'" So, with the patient's mind, they could differentiate between wanting and not wanting to move their hands or make a sound, and between their brain actually making them move or make a sound. So, the brain, when physically stimulated to move the body, represented something different to what the mind actually wanted. And to hammer the point home further, when you sign a letter, the area of your brain that guides your hands can be found on scans, but the decision or reflection on whether or not you want to actually sign the letter can't be found on scans, which is abstract thought or reasoning, which comes from the consciousness of the mind and the soul, not the brain. So, although the physical brain can be stimulated in different ways, you can't stimulate reasoning and free will from it. That's the cause of the spiritual mind, and the physical brain is what allows us to express it. Although there's a distinction between the mind and the brain, there's also an overlap when it comes to sensation, memory, imagination, and perceptual ideas, because these can show up on the brain, but are also part of the mind. So the physical brain and the spiritual mind are distinguishable, but also synonymous with the soul and consciousness of a person, because what the brain absorbs can also become part of the mind or the soul. So in a sense, the mind depends on the function of the brain, but can also work and does exist independently of the brain, which is material, limited, and mortal, whereas the mind functions both materially and immaterially and is immortal. That's why mental phenomena like NDEs and terminal lucidity can occur without brain function. And lastly, hydrocephalus. This is a condition where spinal fluid replaces brain tissue in parts of the brain needed for cognitive function. In worst cases, up to 95% of brain cavities get filled with spinal fluid, which should leave someone in a vegetative state, unable to think. So, where it shouldn't be possible, neurologist John Lorber found on examination that 5% of hydrocephalic patients show high IQ, sometimes at genius level. In the journal article, Is Your Brain Really Necessary? John reported a university student with virtually no brain, but still with a first class degree in math and an IQ of 126. Part of the article reads, the student's physician at the university noticed that the youth had a slightly larger than normal head, and so referred him to Lorber, simply out of interest. When we did a brain scan on him, Lorber recalls, we saw that instead of the normal 4.5 centimeter thickness of brain tissue between the ventricles and the cortical surface, there was just a thin layer of mantle measuring a millimeter or so. His cranium is filled mainly with cerebral spinal fluid. The article continues, startling as it may seem, this case is nothing new in the medical world. Scores of similar accounts litter the medical literature, and they go back a long way. How do we explain it? Overall, John Lorber and others have no physiological explanation to how some hydrocephalic patients have any cognitional function at all, let alone genius IQs. But the Bible gives an explanation. The soul, which is transphysical and can exist and have experiences without the working of the physical body, and the anomalies of NDEs, terminal lucidity, abstract thought, and hydrocephalus supports this. So, if the soul, mind, and consciousness can exist and have experiences without the physical body, what happens to the soul when it leaves the body indefinitely? Hebrews 9:27 says that it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. So once we officially pass over, the physical body returns to the dust. Yahuwah's spirit or breath of life goes upwards and returns back to himself, who is the source. And the soul, in the condition it was in when part of the physical body, goes into a holding place until the final judgment. Hebrews 9:17 says, a testament is of force after men are dead. So when you die, the testimony of who you were and who you are gets spiritually sealed. Genesis 3:19 says, the ground, for out of it was you taken. For dust you are, and unto dust shall you return. Ecclesiastes 12:7 says, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the ruach shall return unto Elohim who gave it. Ecclesiastes 3:21 says, who knows the ruach of man that goes upward? And as the ruach or spirit goes up, the soul, mind, and consciousness, which is the essence of who you are, descends into the holding place, Sheol, which is an extra dimensional spirit realm of reality. Ephesians 4:9 says that when Yahushua died and gave up his ruach, his soul descended into the lower parts of the earth. His case, of course, was unique, and his soul wasn't left in Sheol. David prophesied in Psalm 16:10, for you will not leave my soul in Sheol. Acts 2:31 says, he's seen this before, spoke of the resurrection of Mashiach, that his soul was not left in Sheol. So Sheol is a holding place for the soul once it passes over and detaches from its physical exterior and from Yahuwah's spirit. Sheol is a place of peace or torment. Luke 16:19-31 discusses the rich man and the beggar who both died, but the beggar ended up in Abraham's bosom and in peace, but the rich man ended up in torments with a divide or separation between them. 2nd Ezra 7:32-33 says, on judgment day, that the chambers shall give up the souls that have been committed to them, and the Most High shall appear upon the seat of judgment. On Judgment Day, Revelation 20:13 says that death and Sheol delivered up the dead which were in them. Enoch 22:3-5 says, these are the delightful places, delightful being subjective, where the spirits, the souls of the dead will be collected. For them were they formed. And here will be collected all the souls of the sons of men. These places in which they dwell shall they occupy until the day of judgment and until their appointed period. Their appointed period will be long, even until the great judgment. And I saw the spirits of the sons of men who were dead, and their voices reached to heaven while they were accusing. So these are the souls of the righteous who died, but are still very much alive and conscious. Similar to Revelation, where Yehochanan saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of Yahuwah, and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season. 2nd Ezra 4:35 says, did not the souls also of the righteous ask question of these things in their chambers, saying, how long shall I hope on this fashion? When comes the fruit of the floor of our reward? So again, these are people that have physically passed on, but their souls still cry out. Okay, so to recap, NDEs, terminal lucidity, abstract thoughts, and hydrocephalus show us that we have a consciousness or mind that's distinguishable and can operate independently from our physical being. Thoughts can emerge from the physical brain, but the ability to choose freely concerning those thoughts comes from the mind, which from the biblical perspective represents your soul. It's through the soul that ethical choices for good or evil are made and ultimately ripple into eternity because choices of themselves are not physical. Choices don't disintegrate, they don't die or end. Their impacts last and reverberate through the soul. That's why Yahushua Mashiach is key as the shepherd and overseer of your souls. He says, I am he that lives and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And have the keys of Sheol and of death. So those sinful choices echo through the soul. Through the sacrificial death of Yahushua Mashiach, those choices can be forgiven, redirected, and shepherded to a place of peace at the appointed time. Hebrews 9:14 says, the blood of Hamashiach, who through the eternal Ruach offered himself without spot to Elohim, purges your conscience, which is your mind or your soul, from dead works to serve the living Elohim. And we serve him partly by abstaining from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul, by fleeing sin as from the face of a serpent. For if you come too near it, it will bite you. The teeth thereof are as the teeth of a lion, slaying the souls of men. Ecclesiastes 37:27 also says to prove your soul in your life and see what is evil for it and give not that unto it. Ephesians 4:23 says, and be renewed in the Ruach of your mind. Yahushua Mashiach says, it is the Ruach that quickens, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are Ruach and they are life. Yes, Yahushua Mashiach is the way, the truth, and the life, and also our shepherd in this life and the next. And Hebrews 10:39 says, we are not of them who draw back unto perdition, but of them that believe to the saving of the soul. Matthew 11:28-29 says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. Psalms 34:22 says, Yahuwah redeems the soul of his servants, and none of them that trust in him shall be desolate. James 1:19 says, wherefore lay apart all filthiness and abundance of wickedness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word which is able to save your souls. With that said, may Yahuwah bless, God, and keep your soul through Yahushua Mashiach, the Son of Almighty. So be it.